Welcome to the first game of this episode. It's Hyper Olympic by Konami. This is the port of the 1983 arcade game, which you might know as Track and Field. One thing that's a little unusual is that this game apparently uses licensed music. If you notice, the music playing here is the famous Olympic theme by John Williams. I assume that Konami had to pay to use that in this game. Now, unlike Yie Ar Kung Fu or Antarctic Adventure, this game was well known in both the US and Japan and was a pretty substantial arcade hit. So I think getting this title on the Famicom was probably a bit more prestigious for Nintendo than those first two Konami titles. Now, if you played this game in the arcades, you'll probably remember this being the game that you sort of had to pound on the buttons with your hands furiously in order to get your players to run fast. I imagine this caused quite a bit of stress on machines, and as I recall, one of the machines in a local arcade had installed sort of little rings around the buttons so you couldn't actually pound on them quite so hard. Of course, this made the actual game more difficult to play. Now for the Famicom version, because there's only two buttons on the controller, you only actually use one button to run. The second button is used for jumping and that sort of thing. Now the Famicom port looks pretty similar to the arcade version. The graphics aren't quite as good. However, there is a pretty substantial difference in that the original arcade version had 6 games, whereas the Famicom release only has 4. Those would be the 100-meter dash, the hurdles, the long jump, and the javelin. The running games on this involve mostly just sort of hitting the button to get your player to run really fast. The other games, such as the javelin or the long jump, involve running and then jumping and holding down on your D-pad until your player reaches a certain angle. Much of the challenge of the game for these events is sort of getting your player at the right angle. And then occasionally there's these little interludes here where the players just sort of run around the Olympic theme. You don't actually do anything yourself during these, they're just like little cutscenes. There are these weird little hidden bonuses throughout the game. For example, on the 100-meter dash, if you finish with the exact same time as your opponent, this little teddy bear thing appears and you get a bunch of bonus points. Each of the events have their own little hidden bonus. Now for the American release, this was released under the name Track and Field. And Track and Field actually has 8 events, not just 4. What actually happened is, this game was not released in the US until 1987. At that point, there had already been a sequel in Japan called Hyper Sports, so they actually took both Hyper Olympic and Hyper Sports and combined them into one game, Track and Field. So the US version has the extra 4 sports, which are skeet shooting, pole vaulting, triple jump, and archery. The American version is actually a bit easier than the Japanese version because you can actually select which sport you want to play. In the Japanese Hyper Olympic, you actually have to qualify for an event before you can move on to the next one.